This is Survey of Economics PowerPoint Lecture 3.2. And in this uh, PowerPoint, we're going to go over the basics of currency exchange and how it works. And we're going to look at both the causes of and the consequences of appreciation and depreciations of currencies rising and falling in value. And from this, we're going to derive what is the international market mechanism. We've talked about the free market mechanism before, mostly in the micro panel. We're going to find that it exists at all levels, including the international level. And then we'll look briefly at money market intervention and how central banks principally intervene to stabilize currency values. Now, the first thing we want to kind of keep in mind is that a currency, whatever that currency may be, and we have a host of them here, a currency, like any other commodity, can be bought or sold and can fluctuate in value. In fact, these readings here are from January from 2012, and I don't update it because they continually change. They change on literally a moment by moment basis. And so to update it constantly would just be impossible. Now, when we talk about a foreign exchange rate, we're talking about the value of one currency relative to another currency. It is always bilateral when we think of that. Okay. When we deal with currencies, when we're going to go through both these cases, a currency can do ultimately one of three things. One, it can stay the same value vis-a-vis relative to other currencies. The other is it can appreciate in value, which means it becomes more valuable, or it can depreciate in value against other currencies, which means it depreciates in value. It goes down in value. Okay. So let's start with just a basic example here. And this comes from the previous chart. Right now, if I remember correctly, last week, the euro was trading for about $1.30, which is a little bit more than this. It's about 2 cents difference. With currency exchange rate, $1 will buy 0.78 euros. Okay. So for $1, you get 0.78 euros worth of goods. Therefore, something that costs €1 will cost $1.28. Okay, these are reciprocals of one another. $1 equals 0.78 euros, €1 equals $1.28. Okay, and it's simply you take this and divide it by that and you get this. We won't worry about that. I haven't troubled you with calculations throughout this. I'm not about to start now. Okay, now, when we deal with appreciation, we have the increase in value of one currency relative to another. Let's suppose, for example, that the dollar appreciates in value relative to the euro, such that $1 now gets you 0.9 euros. You'll note that this means the dollar is more valuable. The dollar buys more euros. Okay, was that it bought $1 would buy 0.78, now $1 buys 0.9. Well, conversely, of course, the inverse is true. That means that €1 in goods will now only cost $1.11, which means that just as $1 now equals 0.9 euros, so too €1 equals $1.11. Okay, so for example, an American importer of European goods, instead of having to pay $1.28 for every euro, would now only have to pay $1.11. The effect of this, okay, of the appreciation of the dollar, is therefore European goods become relatively less expensive. If you take a European good that is worth €1, okay, that would cost $1.28. But when the dollar appreciates, that same good, which costs €1, would now only cost $1.11. This has the relative effect of making the European good less expensive. Okay, that's going to help American importers. So too, if you reverse this, it goes the exact opposite way. In other words, if we have this dollar appreciation, as it helps the U.S. importers because the euro is now less in value, so a dollar will buy more. So too, because the euro is less in value relative to the dollar, European importers have to pay more for American goods. So this situation here helps U.S. importers, but hurts U.S. exporters. There's always winners and losers in economics, and such is the case here with currency exchange. We will now look graphically at what appreciation looks like, and we'll look at this appreciation of the dollar that we dealt with in the last slide. And, you know, like anything else in economics, as I said, currency is just like any other commodity. Okay, what determines the value of a currency is the same thing that determines the value of anything else: the supply of it and the demand for it. Okay, and so when we deal with the appreciation of the dollar, there's two reasons it can appreciate in value. There can either be increased demand for it, or there can be decreased supply of it. Okay, and it would just back that up. Okay, right? Because if we hold supply the same, if the supply line doesn't shift, and we shift demand, such as an increased demand for dollars, okay, then it's going to move up this way, and that's why you're going to have your appreciation. So too, if we hold demand constant and decrease the supply of a thing, it's going to go up in value. All right, and then we can deal with what would cause this. Essentially, there are a number of different reasons, and we'll deal with this. Okay, and we'll deal with part of it right now. Okay, the primary reason for increases in the demand for dollar, okay, they can come from two different areas. Okay, area the first, dealing with what we're dealing with in terms of international trade. International trade, we kind of predicate we start from the assumption in international trade that an exporter wants to be paid in their own currency. That's not universally true. Okay, so for example, petroleum is bought in dollars. Okay, there are other dollar-denominated commodities where people want to buy. I mean, as an exporter, you can ask for whatever currency you want, right? I mean, I export my services to Robert Morris. If I wanted to, I could ask them to pay me in, whatever, pesos. Okay, I want dollars. All right. Well, so that's one reason for an increase in the demand for dollars. Those who want to be paid in dollars, okay, if they sell more, people are going to need more dollars to pay for them, to buy it from them, and so the dollar will go up in value. Okay, the other reason is domestic, and we covered it a little bit in macroeconomics. If you can remember from our macroeconomic panel, we talked about the idea that economic growth, okay, when the aggregate demand curve goes up, when aggregate demand increases, people need more money to buy things, okay? Well, that's going to increase the demand for dollars. They're going to demand more dollars, okay? So that's another reason it can go up in value. So too, supply can be both. Supply largely is not as much the subject of international mechanisms as it is domestic mechanisms. Okay, the primary thing controlling the supply of the dollar, or the supply of the euro for that matter, but the supply of the dollar is the central bank's policy, which is to say the Federal Reserve. Okay, so for example, and this is a partial explanation for the appreciation of the euro, or for the appreciation of the dollar. The euro has been sliding in value for a number of reasons. Okay, one of them is the negotiations for Brexit, for Britain leaving the European Union. But another reason is that 4 times last year, the central bank in the United States, the Federal Reserve, allowed interest rates to rise. Okay, well, as a result of that, the supply of the dollar is not keeping pace with the demand for the dollar, and so relative to demand, supply has dropped. Okay, and that's another of the reasons for the appreciation of the dollar. Now, let's look for the fluctuations in the euro. The other thing that can cause the dollar to appreciate relative to the euro has to do with the demand for the euro and the supply of the euro for the same reasons. Okay, so for example, if demand for euros drops, okay, their currency will depreciate in value. The price of their currency in dollars will drop, as you see here. This is dollars per euro. Okay, so the value of their currency will drop. Why would demand for the euro drop? Well, recently, okay, the last 4 months or so, European growth has slowed a bit. Okay, the Germans in the fourth quarter announced that their prospective growth rate had dropped to about 0.2%. That means that less euros are going to be demanded. So just like if economic growth increases the demand for a currency, so too limited economic growth will reduce the demand for currency. Simple enough. And so too, because of the previous appreciation of the euro, demand for European goods, the exports, went down. Well, that also will decrease the demand for euros. And that's going to reverse itself. We'll see how that reverses itself when we get to the international market mechanism. So too, a reduced supply of euros would make the dollar appreciate in value. Okay, or rather, excuse me, let's reverse that. An increased supply of euros would cause the dollar to appreciate in value, would cause the euro to depreciate. Okay, now recently, and only recently, about 6 months ago, the central bank in Europe announced that it would be ending its quantitative easing, which is very similar to what the United States did, where instead of buying and selling short-term bonds, they're buying and selling long-term bonds. Well, because they're ending their quantitative easing, they're not buying as many long-term bonds. The supply of euros on the short run is increasing. Okay, so when the euro is depreciating in value, the supply of it is going up. Okay, and part of it is the European Central Bank's attempt to keep the euro low in value. See, the European Central Bank wants the euro to be lower in value because the European economies are much, much, much more dependent on exports than the United States. Okay, and so they have a vested interest. They want to keep the euro lower in value. People who have investments in euros don't want that. Okay, people who hold euros do not like that. They want the euro to go up in value. And so just generally, the depreciation of the euro is either the result, or a combination of the two, a result of decreased demand for the euro, such as might happen with limited growth, or increased supply of the euro, such as might happen with European Central Bank policy. And so these are just some notes from the graphs on the appreciation of a dollar. Okay, and so this is just kind of to simply remember the understanding of it. And again, I reiterate that the money market functions the same way any other market does. If the demand for the thing goes up and you hold supply constant, the price of the thing is going to go up, in this case, dollars. So too, if the supply of the thing goes down and you don't change any demand, then the price of the dollar will go up. Now, the inverse of that, and what we've been pointing at, is that this is an inverse relationship. This is a reciprocal relationship, I guess I should say. This is a reciprocal relationship between the euro and the dollar. Okay, so if the demand for the dollar is going up, it's going up relative to the euro, which means the demand for the euro is going down. Therefore, the price of the euro is going down, or the supply of the euro goes up, the price of the euro goes down. And this is just what we were talking about with the graphs. An appreciation of the dollar relative to the euro is synonymous with a depreciation of the euro relative to the dollar. They are reciprocal. Now we talk about winners and losers, and I already kind of mentioned this. The more valuable dollar, okay, the dollar appreciates in value. The more valuable dollar has the effect of reducing the price of European goods, okay, for reasons that we already talked about. It means that a dollar will buy more European goods, which has the net effect, the consequence of reducing the price of European goods. And so U.S. importers win, all right? But the more valuable dollar has the effect inversely of making U.S. goods more expensive. So U.S. exporters lose. All right. And so if we look at this, so for example, and we'll look at the Chinese currency, the yuan, as well, as the dollar increases in value against the yuan, it means U.S. exporters win. One of the reasons for the expansion in the trade deficit, the worsening of the trade deficit, is the fact that the Chinese have allowed their currency to fluctuate a little bit, which means that a dollar is buying less. Okay, but at any rate, we'll get to that in a minute. Now, similarly, the increased value of the dollar means that European importers of U.S. products have to pay more. Hence, they lose, right? Because the euro will buy fewer dollars because it is depreciated in value. If the dollar appreciates, its partner, in this case the euro, depreciates. The increased value of the dollar means that European exporters can sell more, because the increased value of the dollar makes European goods less expensive. So European exporters can sell more, and therefore they win. So European exporters like the depreciation of the euro. European importers do not like the depreciation of the euro. Always remember, it's a reciprocal relationship. The other side of the coin is dollar depreciation. Everything we just said about appreciation, just reverse it. Just flip it, okay? Current exchange rate, $1 gets you 0.78 euros. That's what we started with. With a depreciation, the decrease in the value of one currency relative to another. Let the dollar depreciate relative to the euro such that $1 now only buys you 0.6. And you see, that's a depreciation. The dollar is getting you fewer euros, okay? And as a result of that, the same €1 in goods is now going to cost you $1.67 because the dollar is depreciated in value. So European imports in the United States will be more expensive. And the reverse is true. The reverse is true. Okay? It means that €1 is now going to buy you $1.67 worth of products. And so this has the net effect of making European goods, okay, more expensive. And it has the net effect of making American goods less expensive. And so jumping ahead, that means that European importers win, European exporters lose, okay? American importers lose, and American exporters win, okay? Because the euro will now buy $1.67. It's just exactly the reverse of everything we just talked about, okay? Depreciation is the opposite of appreciation. That's why I like the logic of economics. There's a certain esoteric beauty about the whole thing. And again, we can look at the graph of it. Okay, this time the dollar is appreciating in value. We start off here, or the dollar is depreciating in value. Okay, we start off here. If demand for the dollar drops, for the opposite conditions we just talked about, why would demand for the dollar drop? U.S. is selling less goods. People that demand dollars for payment are selling less, and so the demand goes down. Economic growth in the United States slows, and so the demand for the dollar goes down. That'll depreciate its value relative to other currencies. Alternatively, if the supply, not alternatively, but, well, I guess alternatively, if the supply of dollars goes up, then the value of it will go down. You hold demand constant, increase the supply, price goes down, just like it does with any commodity, okay? Why would the supply of it increase? Well, mostly from the central bank. If the central bank, okay, has to fund, for example, extra government spending, okay, by buying bonds from the government, then that's going to increase the supply of money. Deficit spending from the government typically increases the supply of money because they borrow money. Anytime they borrow money, that increases the supply of money for reasons that we looked at when we discussed the monetary system. Okay, we talked about how money is created, and money is created based largely on loans. When a deposit's made, they lend it out and lend it out and lend it out. Remember the multiplier and all that? Well, that means that lending money increases the supply of money. So if the government is borrowing money, particularly if the central bank is borrowing is buying those bonds, but not exclusively, then the amount of money increases in the system. Alternatively, if we look at it from the euro's perspective, the reason the euro would appreciate in value is the same reason, previously that the dollar increased in value. If demand for the euro goes up, then it's going to appreciate in value. Why would demand for the euro go up? Well, if the countries in the eurozone grow at a faster rate, if their economies grow, if they produce more, if people are buying more, then there's going to be more of a demand for euros. If people that want to buy euros, that want to be paid in euros, sell more, then the demand for euros is going to go up and it's going to appreciate in value. And we'll deal with all this because now maybe you can already see how the market mechanism is going to work here. Okay? But we'll get to it. I'll cover the whole thing. We'll see in detail how it works. Okay, and it's not terribly complicated. It requires a certain amount of it's a kind of a systematic logic. So too, the other thing that can lead to the appreciation of the euro is reduced supply. Okay, so what we should have happen is an appreciation of the euro. If the European Central Bank ends quantitative easing and ends releasing money into the system, then the supply of the euro is going to drop and its value will increase. Okay, that hasn't happened yet. Okay, it hasn't happened largely because what the primary thing right now hitting the euro and hitting the value of the euro is the uncertainty over Great Britain, is the uncertainty over the United Kingdom and what's going to happen with Brexit. Okay, and Theresa May, opinions vary on this, but Theresa May is doing an absolutely masterful job of attempting to steer the United Kingdom through some exceptionally choppy waters. Okay, it is not easy, and she's doing actually a masterful job of it. Whether or not her overall strategy and the overall plan works, that's a little beyond our scope here. But I wish her well. I mean, it's not difficult to command a ship in the middle of a hurricane, and that's more or less what Theresa May is doing. And it's very easy for people, and I'm a little on a soapbox here, I suppose, but it's very easy for people to criticize her captaincy, but she's captaining the ship in the middle of a vicious storm. And so that's why I think she's doing a masterful job. I mean, the ship hasn't capsized yet. Okay, enough of that. Now, notes on depreciation. What we said about appreciation of the dollar, just reverse it. When the demand for the dollar goes down, it means the price of the dollar goes down. If the supply of the dollar goes up, the price of the dollar goes down. Reciprocally, if the demand for euros goes up, the price of the euro goes up. And remember, when we talk about the price, we're talking about the price of it relative to another currency. We're not talking about a price of a commodity, okay? The effect on commodities, okay, is consequential. It's not the direct object of this. It's going to be consequential to this. Now you'll affect this. You can manipulate this to some degree so that it does have the consequence you want on the value of your products. All right. A depreciation of the dollar relative to the euro is synonymous with an appreciation of the euro relative to the dollar. Now, winners and losers, exactly the opposite of what we said. The dollar has depreciated in value. Therefore, the less valuable dollar has the effect of increasing the price of European goods. So U.S. importers of European goods have to pay more, and so they lose. The less valuable dollar has the effect of making U.S. goods less expensive, so U.S. exporters win. And the reciprocal is true of the Europeans. The decreased value of the dollar means European importers pay less, they win. The decreased value of the dollar means European exporters prices have increased, so European exporters lose. It's exactly the opposite of the appreciation of the dollar. Now we move on to the Chinese a little bit. We won't go over it in that kind of, that the example was from Britain. I just want to show some graphics here, principally because I like playing with Excel and coming up with the graphics. And it's instructive. Okay. Used to be, And they stopped doing this really in 2007, about thereabouts. Okay. The Chinese pegged their currency to the dollar. Okay. And what that means is that their central bank, the People's Bank, in coordination with their government, unlike the Fed, the People's Bank is directly under the control of the Chinese government. Okay. Well, China's growth over the last 30 years has been largely fueled by increasing their exports, okay? By taking advantage of their cheap labor and lower prices and increasing exports, okay? Well, to stabilize that, they pegged the yuan to the dollar so that $1 would get about 8.25 yuan in 1999. They let it fluctuate between 7.5 and 8.5. Okay, that way you have a stable price for the yuan, which means you have a stable price for Chinese goods, and they want to keep it at a relatively, stable area and a relatively high ratio of dollars to yuan. This way, U.S. importers, okay, it's fairly cheap to buy Chinese products. But when they ended that, which they did in 6 and 7, the yuan began to appreciate against the dollar. Now, this gives us our first indication of the international market mechanism and how it works. Okay? When they, what they call floated their currency, they allowed market forces to determine its value. Because the U.S. is running this massive trade deficit with China, that means the U.S. importers are buying a lot more Chinese goods than Chinese importers are buying American goods. Okay? So as a result of all this U.S. demand for Chinese products, there's a tremendous demand for the yuan. That increases its value, which means as we go through, fewer and fewer yuan are bought with each U.S. dollar. Okay? They let it fall to this band here. Then they started trying to govern it a little bit more and stabilize it until 2009, and then they allowed it to fluctuate again until it dropped to 6.3. And I just looked it up today, or as of today, it was trading for 6.37. Okay. Now with the euro, it's a little bit different. These are the exchange rates. The European Central Bank does not, and the Fed, do not begin to intervene in the money market nearly as much as the People's Bank. Okay, and remember, the People's Bank, the People's Republic of China, their growth over the last 30 years has been almost entirely fueled by exports. So they needed a stable range. That's why they pegged it. That's not true with the Europeans, and it's not true with the United States. So they allow fluctuation, okay? But there's more than just the international market forces that are dealing with this. Okay, you also have, for example, from here to here. All right. From here to here, if you note, this is the US-Europe exchange rates, okay, euros per dollar. You see that a dollar got you fewer and fewer euros. The dollar, through this period, depreciated in value. There are a number of reasons it depreciated in value. It depreciated in value largely because in 2001, the U.S. economy went into a recession. The Federal Reserve's reaction to this was to increase the supply of money in an effort to reduce interest rates and offer an incentive for investment and spending. And so as a result, the supply of dollars went up, and as a result, the dollar depreciated against the euro. All right, then it fluctuated until 2011. And 2011 was the European debt crisis. We won't get into that, though. Okay, just to look at and how different it is, how much less stable it is, how much more it fluctuates than the relationship between the US dollar and the Chinese yuan. And that's because the People's Bank, intervenes in the money market much more. And they do so because they need a stable exchange rate to support their exports. Okay? We'll now have the full exposition of the international market mechanism, and it looks more complicated than it is. This is easier than writing it all out. Okay, and you can see my shorthand. Here are the symbols that I've used, but it really is fairly intuitive and self-explanatory. Let's follow it through, okay? If the demand for U.S. exports goes up, that means the demand for dollar goes up. That's not the only reason the demand for dollar goes up, but this is just with international factors. If you exclude all other factors, okay, and that's what we'll screw with the international market mechanism is other factors, like central bank policy, like growth rates in the various countries, whatever, okay? If we just deal with the international trade aspect of this, this is how the market would work if there's nothing to interfere with the natural process. The demand for U.S. exports goes up, therefore the demand for dollar goes up. The demand for the dollar goes up, the price of the dollar in foreign currencies goes up, which means the price of U.S. exports goes up, which means, as we know from supply and demand, price up, demand down. And so the demand for U.S. exports will go down. And if the demand for U.S. exports goes down, then the dollar goes down, then the price of the dollar in foreign currencies goes down, then the price of U.S. exports goes down, then the demand for U.S. exports goes up, and so it fluctuates, you see? It looks like a sine function from trigonometry, okay? So too, okay, we see the reciprocal. If the price of the dollar in foreign currencies goes up as a result of the increased demand, the price of the foreign currency in dollars goes down. Therefore, the price of foreign imports goes down. Therefore, the demand for foreign imports goes up. Therefore, the demand for foreign currency goes up. And therefore, the price of foreign currency goes up. And when the price of foreign currency goes up, it has the relative effect, as we talked about before, of the price of the foreign products going up, which means demand for the foreign products will go down, which means demand for the foreign currency will go down, which means the price of the foreign currency will go down, and so it fluctuates, okay, just like the sine function, okay, goes up and down. And so the lesson from this, of the logic behind this system, and look at it again and just go through it, but the logic of this is that in terms of international trade, all right, there is an invisible hand. Trade balances, current account balances, based on this, based on the fluctuation of currency, if everyone floats their currency and leaves them alone, trade balances, current account balances will, over any extended period of time, even out. Okay? The reason that they don't, the only reason they don't, is because of intervention in the money market. Okay? So, for example, we talked about it with the Chinese. As the United States began to run a current account deficit with the Chinese, the price of the value of the yuan, the price of the yuan in dollars, should have gone up so that you get fewer and fewer yuan with each dollar. That did not happen. It did not happen because the People's Bank intervened, okay, to prevent it from happening. Okay, they stopped the natural process of the market mechanism. The reason that, just kind of tangentially, I suppose, a little bit, but the reason the Chinese stopped pegging their currency is because they were beginning to have a significant problem. They have what's called a monetary overhang, where their supply of money is greater than their gross domestic product, and that's inflationary. And they've been doing other, like, incremental market reforms, and one of them is to release some of the price controls. They really can't do that if there's the threat of inflation. And so they were in that most enviable of all positions, just as I would like to be. They had too much money in their system. They had too many dollars in their system. Okay? And so they began to shrink their growth rates willingly, intervene less, let the yuan fluctuate, let demand for exports go down a little bit. But then that threatened overall the progress of Chinese reform and growth. And so they pegged it again, this time at a lower band, about 6.5 to 1. Okay? And that's one of the, well, that's actually on the table in the trade negotiations between Lighthizer and He. Liu He is the vice premier of China, and he's in charge of their trade negotiations. He is the counterpart in these negotiations with Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. trade representative, who I introduced in the last PowerPoint slide. Okay, fine, good. That's the international market mechanism. And this is just the explanation of it. We'll go through these rather rapidly. Foreign demand for U.S. export rises, demand for the dollar rises. This leads to an increase in the price of the dollar in foreign currencies. The effect of the increase in the price of the dollar in foreign currencies is to make the price of U.S. exports higher. From the law of demand, we know that if the price of U.S. export rises, demand for them will fall. This then begins the reverse of the cycle. All right, and read through this and look through that a couple of times. It's really very logical. It's almost intuitive. And that's why I say here at the end, what I concluded the discussion with on that last slide was the idea that over time, the balance of trade should even out. This is just a sampling, okay? There are a great many ways that central banks can intervene and modify, I guess is a good word for it, modify that invisible hand mechanism we just went over. And there's reasons for modifying it, okay? But ultimately, the reasons all kind of aren't. Here's the thing, okay? What we just came up with is that over an extended period of time, current account balances are going to balance out if you just leave them alone. If you just leave the market mechanism alone, current account balances will even out over time. Okay, they didn't always know this. They used to, at first they fixed the value of currencies to gold, then they did it to dollars and pounds under the Bretton Woods system. Then Nixon removed that, and they found out that, well, over a period of time, they're gonna fluctuate and they'll even out over any extended period of time. Okay, the thing that prevents them from doing that is intervention. Okay, in the money markets. And so, for example, the Chinese keeping the yuan artificially low in value against the dollar, that boosts their export industry. Yeah, and it hurts their import industry. Okay, it also gave them too many dollars, which is inflationary. There's always a plus and a minus on these. Okay, and so if a central bank intervenes to help their export industry, reciprocally they hurt their import industry. Okay. And so the mechanisms, if the demand for the dollar increases, okay, hence increasing its price, we can increase the supply of dollars to neutralize that. Okay, so if there's a demand for dollars that increases the price of the dollar, what does that mean? If the demand increases, that means the dollar is appreciating in value, which means imported products will be less expensive. You can buy more, okay, with the increased value of the dollar, but exporters lose, okay, because the increased value of the dollar is going to hurt the export industry. So to neutralize that, increase the supply of money. How do you increase the supply of money? Do you print more? No, you don't print more. The central bank, the Federal Reserve prints actually very little money. Mostly it's just to replace the money that's already there with a small increase. No, the number one mechanism, you should know this from our discussion of monetary policy, the number one mechanism, buy bonds. When they buy bonds, they release money into the system. That increases the supply. When they increase the supply of the dollar, the value of the dollar goes down. Okay, that's the same reason interest rates go down. All right, interest rates being basically the price of money. And so if the demand for the dollar is increasing, which hurts the export industry in the United States, you just simply increase supply. And so we might ask ourselves, last year, interest rates rose 4 times, which means the dollar was appreciating in value. Okay, who benefits from that? American importers. All right, American importers. American exporters get hurt. And that's one of the things that exacerbates a current account imbalance. Okay, now, so too, if the demand for the dollar drops, which reduces its price, helps out exporters, makes imports more expensive, you can neutralize this effect by dropping the supply of money. How? The principal way the Fed drops the supply of money is to sell bonds. Okay, or in the case of unwinding, to just let them simply mature and not do anything with them. Okay, that's going to reduce the supply of money, okay, which is going to increase its value. The demand for the dollar dropping drops the value of the dollar. By drying up the supply of money, that increases the value of the dollar and neutralizes this, okay? If the supply of the dollar rises, such as when they buy bonds, such as when the government deficit spends, okay, that reduces its price. You can simply buy dollars to increase the price. The central bank can buy dollars the same way as anybody else. Principally, think about it this way, okay? Go back to our discussion of monetary policy and the monetary system. When the Federal Reserve sells bonds, okay, that's the same as buying dollars. They're buying the dollars with IOUs in the form of bonds. So when they sell bonds, they're buying dollars. They're pulling them out of the system, okay? That increases the demand for dollars and neutralizes the effect, okay, of the supply. Supply up, price down. How do we get the price back up? Buy it. If the supply of the dollar drops, such as happens with increased interest rates, that kind of thing, hence increasing its price, we can buy foreign currencies. Okay, remember, the value of currencies is entirely based. It's all relative, okay? So if the supply of the dollar drops, because principally the central bank, the Federal Reserve, is reducing, if the supply of the dollar drops, it's generally because they're selling bonds, okay? You can neutralize this by buying foreign currencies, because if the supply of the dollar drops, that means the dollar's going up in value relative to other currencies, okay? To neutralize that, buy other currencies. That'll increase the demand of them and prop up their value, okay? And that brings us to the idea of foreign reserves, of holding a certain amount of foreign currency. There are a few different reasons for holding foreign currency. Primarily, we hold foreign currency for importers of those products. Like, for example, the central bank and banks in general will hold euros because they have clients that buy European products. Okay, so they'll have to go to the bank and exchange their dollars for euros. Same way tourists do. Okay, now, if we buy foreign currencies and increase our foreign reserves, this increases the demand for foreign currencies and therefore the price. Okay, and so if it increases the price of the foreign currency, it decreases the price of the dollar. This has the net effect of depreciating the dollar. So too, if we sell foreign currencies, decreasing the foreign reserve of them, this increases the supply of the foreign currency in the system and therefore reduces the price of the foreign currency. The reciprocal, this move, would also increase the price of the dollar. So this would create a dollar appreciation. Sell foreign currencies, dollar appreciates. Buy foreign currencies, dollar depreciates relative to the foreign currency. This is just another an additional mechanism to neutralize the invisible hand. There are many more of this. When we do international trade and finance, we spend a considerably longer time dealing with currency exchange and how it works and how it functions, and the list of very creative mechanisms that countries use, that central banks use, to intervene and screw with this invisible hand. You know, there are many, 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 many creative things that they can do. And that concludes the discussion of international currency exchange and how it affects both monetary policy and is affected by money and everything. That just kind of concludes everything. All right.